The Black Hawk helicopter thundered through the Afghan night, its rotors slicing through air so thin it barely held the aircraft aloft at 8,000 feet. Staff Sergeant Alexandra Alex Carson sat rigid against the vibrating metal floor, her fingers methodically checking the straps of her combat harness. 5 Delta Force operators watched her with the calculated disinterest of apex predators. Something was wrong. In 5 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment, Carson had developed a sixth sense for danger. It wasn't just the mission parameters changing last minute. It wasn't just being relegated to Overwatch-only status. It was the way these Delta operators looked at her, like she was already a ghost. They threw her from a helicopter at 8,000 feet with no warning, no parachute, and no chance of survival, narrated Colonel James Iron Man McIntosh, his weathered voice carrying the weight of decades in special operations. What they didn't know was that they weren't eliminating a problem. They were creating something far more dangerous, a Ranger with nothing left to lose. The morning had begun at Forward Operating Base Chapman, a CIA stronghold nestled against the Hindu Kush Mountains. The same mountains where Soviet Special Forces had once hunted Mujahideen fighters. The same ridgelines where McIntosh had run operations during the Cold War, back when America's enemies had different names but familiar methods. Alex Carson was a second-generation soldier. Her father had walked point in Vietnam's Mekong Delta before she was born, returning with a Silver Star, 3 Purple Hearts, and nightmares he never discussed. He'd taught her to shoot when she was 12, not because he wanted her to follow in his footsteps, but because he believed self-reliance was the most precious gift a father could give a daughter. Square your shoulders. Control your breathing. The rifle is just a tool. Your mind is the weapon, he'd told her, words she carried through Ranger School and 2 combat tours. In the briefing room, Carson methodically broke down her M110 semi-automatic sniper system, 7.62 millimeters, effective range 800 meters, though she'd made confirmed kills at 100. The weapon was already clean, but ritual calmed her mind. 20 meters away, McIntosh watched from the shadows, his craggy face revealing nothing as Major Harrison delivered the briefing. Operation Copper Valley, Harrison announced, pointing to satellite imagery of mountain compounds. Intelligence has identified Ahmad Rashidi moving through the Coronel Valley, bomb maker, facilitator, responsible for the 3 casualties we took last month. Carson's hands stilled. Staff Sergeant Wilkins had been her spotter on 2 missions. Lieutenant Rodriguez had shared his last chocolate bar with her the night before his Humvee hit the IED. Private Chen had been 22, with a fiancé waiting in San Diego. Delta takes point on the ground, Harrison continued. Carson, you're in the bird for Overwatch only. Orders from above. Captain Victor Stone, Delta team leader, leaned back in his chair. 6'2" of tactical precision with a face that looked carved from granite rather than bone. Why do we need Ranger Overwatch if we're not expecting contact? Insurance? Carson knows these mountains better than anyone, Harrison replied, his tone neutral but eyes watchful. The locals call her the Ghost Walker. If things go sideways, she can guide you out. As the room emptied, Sergeant Mark Wheeler found Carson at the armory. Like her, he was loading magazines beyond standard combat load. Something's wrong, Alex, he whispered, using her first name against protocol. You've run 17 ops in the Coronel. Now suddenly you're taxi service? Carson met his eyes. Watch your 6 out here, Mark, and check my gear locker if I don't come back. Wheeler nodded, understanding the unspoken message. In her locker was a field notebook documenting discrepancies she'd found. Opium shipments that disappeared from inventory, weapons that never reached their destinations. Intelligence that seemed selectively ignored. In her quarters, Carson sent an encrypted message to a secure line used only in extremis. Cold wind. Suspect mole activity, preparing for worst case. The recipient was McIntosh, officially retired but still connected to networks older than most active operators' careers. She triple-checked her survival kit, adding items McIntosh had developed during Cold War operations. Water purification tablets that worked in freezing conditions, a fire starter that functioned when wet, a medical kit with Soviet-era stimulants that could keep a wounded operator mobile. The Black Hawk lifted off at 2300 hours, rotors beating against mountain air. Through night vision, the landscape below appeared in ghostly green, a terrain Carson had memorized through countless missions. She knew every cave, every goat path, every seasonal stream. She knew where the snow melt made river crossings treacherous and which ridgelines offered concealment from thermal imaging. 20 minutes into the flight, Stone unhooked his harness and moved toward her, his movement casual but purposeful. "Carson," his voice came through her headset, barely audible above the rotor wash. "You know what your problem is?" She turned slightly, maintaining peripheral vision on the other operators who had begun to form a loose circle around her. "Enlighten me." "You're too effective," Command noticed. "The Coronel belongs to you now." Every warlord, every smuggler knows about the female ranger who walks their mountains like she was born to them. Stone moved closer. "That kind of reputation is bad for certain types of business." "What business would that be?" Carson's hand drifted toward her sidearm. "The kind that pays better than an army salary." His hand rested casually on his knife. "Rashidi isn't just a bomb maker. He's a facilitator. Opium, weapons, intelligence, a necessary evil in this part of the world." As Stone spoke, Carson noticed the subtle tightening of the circle around her. 5 against 1 in a confined space at 8,000 feet. The math wasn't good. "There's a specialized branch inside Langley," Stone continued. "They run black operations, completely off books, completely deniable. Afghanistan is their ATM machine. The opium funds operations Congress would never approve, in countries they don't even know we're in. And I've been interfering with the cash flow," Carson stated flatly. 100,000 each to remove the obstacle. Nothing personal, Carson. You're just too damn good at your job, like McIntosh was before they forced him out." The knife moved with practiced efficiency, slicing through her harness straps. Carson calculated options in the milliseconds that followed. Fight in a confined space against 5 operators? Impossible. Call for help? The pilots might be complicit. Before she could decide, hands gripped her shoulders and vest. "Should have stayed home, Ranger," Stone said, then nodded to his team. The Black Hawk door gaped open, 8,000 feet of darkness below. No parachute, no warning, no chance. They threw her out. Terminal velocity in free fall is approximately 120 miles per hour. At that speed, the human body becomes nothing more than a projectile subject to the merciless laws of physics. Most people would spend their final 40 seconds screaming, flailing, praying. Alexandra Carson did none of these things. She went to work. First priority, orientation. Carson spread her arms and legs into a stable arch position, transforming her body into an airfoil to control her descent. The mountains rushed up with terrifying speed, but panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Second priority, location. The green-tinted world through her night vision goggles revealed the Coronel Valley spread below like a topographical map come to life. There, a silver ribbon reflecting moonlight. The Coronel River, running high with snowmelt. Third priority, angle. She shifted her body position, tracking toward the river. The water would be near freezing, but better than rock. The angle had to be perfect. Too steep, and the impact would shatter her like glass. Too shallow, and she'd skip across the surface like a stone, breaking every bone on first contact. In her mind, McIntosh's voice echoed from a specialized training course 5 years earlier. The retired colonel had pulled strings to get her into a classified Halo program, normally reserved for Delta and SEAL operators. Water entry from extreme altitude is about physics, not courage, he'd lectured. The body can survive incredible impacts if you know how to distribute the force. It's not about being tough. It's about being smart. 20 seconds to impact. Carson pulled her rifle tight against her chest, locked her ankles, and positioned her hands to protect her head. Below, the river looked impossibly narrow. At this speed, it might as well be a thread. 10 seconds. She rotated her body from horizontal to nearly vertical, feet first, angled forward at precisely 45 degrees. Toes pointed, muscles tensed but not rigid. The key was to penetrate the surface cleanly, allowing the water to gradually decelerate her body instead of hitting it like a concrete wall. 5 seconds. Time dilated. The river filled her vision. No longer a thread, but a rushing torrent of snowmelt and stone. She could see individual ripples, the way current broke around submerged rocks. Too late to adjust now. Too late for anything but commitment. 1 second. She took the deepest breath of her life. Impact. The world exploded into chaos and pain. Even at the optimal angle, hitting water from 8,000 feet felt like being struck simultaneously by every linebacker in the NFL. The shock traveled up through her feet, her legs, her spine, trying to compress her skeleton into itself. Her vision went white, then black, then white again. But she'd calculated correctly. Instead of shattering on impact, she penetrated the surface like a knife, the water bleeding off her velocity as she plunged into the dark. The cold was beyond description. Not a sensation but an assault, so intense it felt like burning. Every nerve screamed in protest. Her lungs, compressed by impact, demanded air. But she was still moving too fast, still descending. The river was perhaps 20 feet deep here, and she hit the bottom hard enough to crater into the silt. Rocks scraped against her vest, her helmet cracked against something solid, and her left shoulder exploded in pain that suggested dislocation at minimum. But she was alive. Carson pushed off the bottom with legs that barely responded, kicking toward what she hoped was the surface. The water was so cold it stole strength with each second. Her gear, waterlogged and heavy, tried to drag her back down. Her head broke the surface and she gasped, sucking in air that tasted like salvation itself. The current slammed her into a boulder, adding broken ribs to her inventory of injuries, but the impact also pushed her toward the shallows. She clawed at rocks, fingernails breaking, until she could drag herself partially onto a gravel bar. For 30 seconds, she just lay there, coughing up river water mixed with blood. Every breath a symphony of pain. Her left shoulder definitely dislocated, at least 2 ribs broken, something torn in her right knee. But she was breathing. She was thinking. She was alive. Above, the Blackhawks' rotors faded into the distance. They'd circle back to confirm the kill, but the river had carried her almost a quarter-mile downstream from the impact point. In the darkness, with the tree cover, they'd never spot her. As she conducted an inventory of her equipment, Carson discovered a small device sewn into her tactical vest, an advanced CIA tracking implant designed to transmit her location continuously. Under normal circumstances, a safety measure. Tonight, a death sentence. Let them think they're tracking a corpse, she muttered, deciding to keep the device intact. It's the only advantage I have. She forced herself to her knees, then to her feet. Standing took 3 attempts and left her vision swimming at the edges, but adrenaline was a powerful ally. She needed to move. The temperature was dropping rapidly, her clothes were soaked, and hypothermia would kill her just as efficiently as the fall should have. Using her emergency kit, Carson relocated her shoulder, a procedure that made a wet, horrible sound and required biting down on her rifle sling to prevent screaming. Next, she fashioned a binding for her ribs using the same sling. It wouldn't heal them, but it might prevent a punctured lung if she had to move quickly. Her rifle had survived, protected by its case and her body during the fall. She field-stripped and cleaned it meticulously, working by touch in the darkness. The scope was cracked but functional. The ammunition, sealed in waterproof containers, remained viable. Dawn revealed the Blackhawk returning, circling the river like a metal vulture. Through her damaged but serviceable binoculars, Carson observed it hovering near her impact point. From this distance, she could imagine the conversation inside. Confusion, then concern, then the growing realization they hadn't found a body. The helicopter landed on a flat section of riverbank. 5 figures emerged, spreading out in a search pattern. Even from this distance, she recognized Stone's distinctive predatory movement. They were armed for war, not rescue, confirming their intentions. Carson settled into a shooting position, using a fallen log to support her injured shoulder. The range was extreme, nearly 800 meters, at the outer limits of effective engagement with her damaged equipment and injured body. She might manage one good shot before the recoil became unbearable. She watched them search, patient as the mountains themselves. They were good. Professional movements, overlapping fields of fire, textbook small unit tactics. But they were also arrogant. assuming they were hunting a corpse rather than a survivor. One of them, Sergeant Reynolds, she thought, stopped to drink from his canteen. A small human moment that meant he felt safe. That was their first mistake. Carson lined up the shot, adjusting for wind, elevation, and the slight tremor in her injured body. The calculations were automatic, carved into muscle memory by thousands of hours on firing ranges from Fort Benning to Bagram. She didn't shoot Reynolds. That would have been expected, obvious. Instead, she put a round through Stone's radio antenna. The high-powered rifle's report echoed across the valley like thunder. The antenna exploded in a shower of sparks and plastic, and 5 elite operators hit the ground like their strings had been cut. The message was clear. I'm alive. I can reach you. This is your only warning. For 10 seconds, nothing moved except the river. Then Stone's voice carried across the valley, amplified by mountain acoustics. Carson, I know that's you. She didn't respond, just watched through her scope as they scrambled for better cover. They'd gone from hunters to hunted in the space of a trigger pull, and the psychological impact of that reversal was more devastating than any bullet. We can work this out, Stone called. It was just business. Carson smiled grimly. Everything was just business until someone started shooting back. She displaced, moving through the pain to a new position. Rule 1 of sniper warfare. Never fire twice from the same location. Her knee barely supported her weight and black spots danced at the edges of her vision, but she'd operated in worse condition. In Iraq, she'd completed a mission with a bullet in her hip. In Kandahar, she'd walked 15 kilometers with a broken ankle. Pain was temporary. Death was permanent. The Delta team was moving now, trying to flank her suspected position. Good tactics, but they were making another assumption, that she was trying to escape. They didn't understand that she wasn't running. She was hunting. Carson had spent 5 years learning every trail, every cave, every hidden path in these mountains. The locals called her the Ghost Walker, the American woman who appeared and disappeared like morning mist. Those same trails that smugglers used to move opium, she now used to move herself, staying ahead of the Delta team's pursuit, but always visible enough to keep them following. She led them deeper into the valley, away from their helicopter, away from support. The pilot would be getting nervous, checking fuel levels, wondering why his passengers hadn't returned. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to someone raising an alarm. At a narrow section of trail, she left a surprise. Not an explosive, nothing that obvious, but a simple deadfall trap her father had taught her, the kind Vietnamese fighters had used against American patrols. When Sergeant Miller, bringing up the rear, hit the trigger, a log swung down from above. He dodged it, barely, but the movement sent him tumbling down a steep slope. Not fatal, but his ankle snapped audibly when he hit the bottom. Now they were down to 4, and they had to carry their wounded. The mathematics of the pursuit was shifting in her favor. Carson, Stone's voice had lost its confident edge, this doesn't end well for you. Even if you make it back, who's going to believe you? 5 decorated Delta operators against 1 Ranger with PTSD. You know how this plays out. He was right, of course. Her word against theirs, assuming any of them survived to give testimony. But Carson wasn't planning on a he said, she said resolution. She had something better in mind. As darkness fell again, Carson remembered something McIntosh had told her years ago during a classified briefing about Soviet operations in these same mountains. The CIA had established numerous weapons caches during the Afghan-Soviet conflict, many of which remained untouched decades later. One such cache was supposedly hidden less than 2 kilometers from her current position. If it existed, it might contain supplies, weapons, and most importantly, communications equipment. To reach it, however, she would need to pass directly through the Delta team's position. Most operators would call that impossible. Carson called it Tuesday. She recovered a damaged but functional radio from Miller's equipment, allowing her to monitor the Delta team's communications. What she heard confirmed her suspicions. Package is still active, Stone was saying. Request immediate extraction and QRF support. Yes, sir. I understand the complications. No, sir. We cannot confirm elimination. Copy that. Sanitize and extract. Sanitize, military speak for leaving no evidence, no witnesses. They weren't just going to kill her now. They were going to erase any trace that she'd ever existed. Night fell, bringing cold that turned breath to vapor and made fingers clumsy on triggers. The Delta team had made camp in a defensible position. Good high ground, clear fields of fire, rock formations for cover, professional to the end. But they'd made one crucial error. They'd camped near water, a small stream that ran down from higher elevations. Water meant noise, which covered movement, and predictable approach routes for anyone needing to drink. Carson waited until 0300, the dead time when even alert guards fought to keep their eyes open. She moved like water, like shadow, like the ghost the locals believed her to be. Every step calculated, every breath controlled. Her injuries screamed with each movement, but pain was just the body's opinion, and she had stopped listening hours ago. The Delta team had set two guards, Davis on the north side, Matthews on the south. Good positioning, overlapping fields of observation, but they were watching for someone trying to escape, not infiltrate. Carson belly crawled through their perimeter, moving so slowly that motion sensors wouldn't register her presence, so quietly that even mountain mice didn't flee her approach. It took her 90 minutes to cover 50 meters, but patience was a sniper's primary virtue. She passed close enough to Davis to hear his breathing, to see the vapor from his exhales in the cold air. Her hand found a rock, perfectly sized, and she threw it into the darkness behind him. The sound was small but distinct, and his head snapped around, rifle tracking toward the noise. In that moment of distraction, she moved past him, flowing into the camp itself. Stone and the others were sleeping, trusting their guards. She could have killed them all, slit throats, quick and quiet. But death would be too easy, too clean. She wanted them to face justice, to have their betrayal exposed to the institutions they had corrupted. Instead, she found what she was looking for: Stone's satellite phone, charging from a portable battery. She couldn't take it, they'd notice immediately. But she could use it. Her fingers flew across the keypad, sending a coded message not to Wheeler but to McIntosh. Coordinates, situation, request for backup. More importantly, a directive to check the old Soviet cache where she planned to leave evidence of Stone's conversations with his CIA handlers. Mission complete, she began her exfiltration. But as she moved past Stone's sleeping form, his eyes snapped open. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other in the darkness. His hand started moving toward his weapon. Carson's knife was faster, not a killing blow. She drove it through his hand, pinning it to the ground. His scream woke the camp, but she was already moving, vanishing into the darkness as lights blazed and voices shouted. "Find her!" Stone roared, pulling the knife free with a sound that was part pain, part rage. "Find her now!" But finding a ghost in mountains that belonged to her was like catching smoke with bare hands. The Soviet weapons cache was exactly where McIntosh's old intelligence had indicated, beneath an unremarkable rock outcropping that blended perfectly with the mountainside. The entrance, hidden by decades of erosion and deliberate camouflage, would have been impossible to find without precise coordinates. Inside, Carson discovered a treasure trove of Cold War relics: AK-47s coated in cosmoline, medical supplies with Cyrillic labeling, and most importantly, an ancient but functional field radio and a satellite phone that McIntosh must have added more recently. The batteries showed full charge. McIntosh had been maintaining this cache, preparing for contingencies that seemed paranoid until they suddenly weren't. Dawn painted the peaks orange and gold as Carson made contact. The satellite phone connected on the first try. "Mac," she said when McIntosh answered, his voice instantly alert despite the hour. "I need you to record this call." She told him everything: the setup, the attempted murder, Stone's revelation about CIA-backed opium trafficking. As she spoke, she could hear helicopters in the distance, multiple aircraft approaching rapidly, either rescue or execution, depending on who arrived first. "Alex, stay put," McIntosh ordered, his voice steady. "Harrison wasn't part of this. He's scrambling everyone. We're coming for you." "Negative, I'm finishing this." Carson loaded a flare gun from the cache. "Just make sure this gets to Jayasak and the Inspector General." Whatever happens next, I want the truth on record. The helicopters were visible now. Two Blackhawks and an Apache gunship escort. But whose helicopters? Friend or foe? She'd find out soon enough. Carson fired the flare straight up, a bright red star that hung in the morning sky like a defiant declaration. Here I am. Come and get me. The lead Black Hawk banked sharply toward her position. Through her binoculars, she could see the door gunner's weapon trained on her location. But behind him, she glimpsed a face that made her smile. Wheeler's. And beside him, Major Harrison, looking like he wanted to kill someone. The second Black Hawk was heading for Stone's position. The Apache circled overhead, weapon systems tracking, ready to intervene if necessary. As the first helicopter settled onto the ridgeline and Wheeler jumped out running toward her position, Carson knew she had won the only victory that mattered. She had survived against impossible odds, against betrayal, against gravity, against the cold mathematics of terminal velocity. Jesus Christ, Alex, Wheeler said, taking in her injuries, the improvised sling, the obvious concussion, the way she held herself to protect broken ribs. How are you even standing? Rangers don't quit, she said simply. We also don't die easy. Behind them, she could hear shouting from Stone's position, the sounds of an arrest in progress. The Delta team would face court-martial, conspiracy charges, attempted murder. Their careers were over, their reputations destroyed. As medics approached with a stretcher, Carson waved them off. I'll walk, she said, even though each step sent lightning through her body. I jumped out of a helicopter at 8,000 feet. I can make it to the bird. Harrison fell into step beside her, his expression unreadable. Carson, what you did, surviving that fall? It's impossible. No, sir, she replied, wincing as her knee threatened to buckle. It's just highly improbable. There's a difference. The physics alone. Physics is just math, sir, and I've always been good at math. She paused at the helicopter's door, looking back at the mountains that had almost become her grave. Besides, Rangers don't need parachutes. We just need the will to survive and the knowledge of how to fall. 3 weeks later, Carson stood in a classified hearing room deep within the Pentagon. Her shoulder was still healing, her ribs still tender, but she was back in uniform. The investigation had been thorough, the evidence overwhelming. Stone and his team were facing life in military prison. General Morrison, commander of Joint Special Operations Command, addressed her from across the polished table. Staff Sergeant Carson, what you survived defies explanation. The fall alone should have killed you. The injuries should have incapacitated you. The pursuit should have ended you. Yet here you stand. Rangers lead the way, sir, she replied, the motto carrying new weight after everything. Indeed they do, Morrison held up a folder. Which is why I'm offering you a choice. Full medical retirement with honors or a new assignment. There's a unit that could use someone with your particular combination of skills and sheer refusal to die. What kind of unit, sir? Morrison smiled slightly. I had a feeling you'd say that. Report to Fort Bragg, Building 9. Someone will meet you there. As Carson left the hearing room, Wheeler caught up with her in the hallway. So, medical retirement or mystery assignment? What'll it be? What do you think? He laughed. I think they threw you out of a helicopter and you turned it into a promotion. I think you're physically incapable of taking the easy path. The easy path is boring, Carson replied, then winced as her ribs reminded her that the hard path had consequences. When Carson arrived at Building 9, an unmarked structure in a remote corner of Fort Bragg, she found Colonel McIntosh waiting for her. Though officially retired, he wore a fresh uniform with full insignia. They reactivated you, she observed. Some things are worth coming back for, he replied. They're calling it Project Oversight, a specialized unit to investigate corruption within the intelligence community. The kind of unit that might have prevented what happened to you? You knew, didn't you, about the CIA operations? McIntosh's weathered face hardened. I suspected. It's why they forced me out 10 years ago. But suspicion isn't proof. You brought back proof. He led her into a secure briefing room where a team of unfamiliar faces awaited. A mix of military and intelligence personnel, all with the guarded expressions of people who had seen behind too many curtains. "We don't fight just for territory, Carson," McIntosh said quietly. "We fight for what this country stands for. When people inside the system betray that, they're more dangerous than any foreign enemy. So we're what? Internal affairs for spooks? We're the last line of defense against those who'd use American power for personal gain." He handed her a file with a list of names: operators, politicians, contractors. "Your new team, your new mission." 6 months later, footage from Carson's recovered helmet camera was shown in a closed congressional hearing. The grainy night vision images captured the moment of her fall, the impact with the water, the survival against all odds. It became required viewing at Fort Benning, at West Point, at every training facility where America's warriors learned their craft. Carson herself became a legend in special operations circles, not for what she'd done on missions, though her record was exemplary, but for being the ranger who got thrown from a helicopter at 8,000 feet and not only survived but returned to bring down the men who tried to kill her. They'd thought they were eliminating a problem. Instead, they'd created a legend. And legends, as any soldier will tell you, are much harder to kill than people. On the training grounds at Fort Bragg, Carson watched a new class of Rangers running their drills. Beside her stood McIntosh, now the official commander of Project Oversight. "Think any of them have what it takes?" he asked. Carson studied the young men and women pushing through exhaustion and pain. "The question isn't whether they have what it takes, it's whether they know they have it." A young lieutenant approached, clearly intimidated but determined. "Staff Sergeant Carson, they told me to ask you about water entry techniques from extreme altitude. Is it really possible to survive a fall from 8,000 feet? Carson exchanged a glance with McIntosh. "It's not about the fall, Lieutenant. It's about what you do on the way down." She pointed to her temple. "Up here is where you live or die, long before you hit the water." As they walked away, McIntosh nodded toward the mountains visible on the horizon. "Some people think values like honor, loyalty, and sacrifice are outdated. But you proved they're still the foundation of America's real strength." Carson watched the sun setting over the training grounds where future generations would learn the lessons she'd paid for in blood and broken bones. "Rangers don't need parachutes to survive, sir. We just need the will to never quit and the wisdom to know that falling isn't the same as failing. The only difference is whether you get back up." "And Rangers always get back up," McIntosh finished. "Always," Carson agreed, turning toward Building 9 where her team waited for their next mission. The team that would ensure America's most powerful institutions remained true to their purpose. The team that would remind those who forgot that some lines should never be crossed, that some betrayals could never be forgiven. The team that, like Alexandra Carson herself, had learned the most important lesson of all. It's not how far you fall that defines you. It's how you rise.